This is such a joy and an honor to be able to host Adi for this session. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they're going to do so much more justice to this than I ever could. But I will just say that Adilka is an incredible longtime organizer, beloved community member, ranging from lots of different areas of work. I had the true joy of working with Adi, and I was thrilled to find a way to collaborate with her again. And she also runs like beautiful poetry sessions. And I will pass it over to Adi. But yeah, today we're going to be looking at how, from an organizer perspective, people who engage in this work center and incorporate collective care practices to make this work sustainable, and also to practice what we preach and bring it into the work that we're doing. So Adi, I will pass it to you. Hopefully you can unmute yourself. Yeah. Cool.
Yes. Thank you so much, Gabriella. Thank you. Thank you. I'm super honored. It is a privilege to be here with you all. So good afternoon from Brooklyn, New York. I know it is evening over there. But my name is Adilka. I use she and they pronouns. I go by Adi. I prefer Adi. And I'm going to be your facilitator today to, like Gabriella was saying, bring us home. And so just wanted to briefly introduce myself and the work that I do and the work that I've done the last 2 decades or so. And so I started organizing back in 2003. I was 14 years old here in New York City. I was undocumented and really looking for a space where I can be myself and really figure out who I was. When you're 14, you think you know it all, and then you grow up and you realize you don't know it all, and it's okay. But I was looking for somewhere to really get my footing in life, essentially. And I found organizing in a moment where we had a billionaire mayor, so Michael Bloomberg, and he was closing down a lot of the schools in New York City. And so in replace of that was opening up small schools inside buildings. And so that was my experience walking into high school, which is really tumultuous. I went into a high school that had more police officers and they did guidance counselors, into a high school that had military recruiters coming more than college counselors. And it wasn't by chance, right? We understand that folks who grow up in low-income communities, folks of color, are usually targeted by the military and recruitment versus going to school. I would then spend the next 18 years of my life at a political organization called Make the Road New York, which is where I had the honor to meet Gabriella. And I would play a lot of different roles. You know, when you first start organizing, we call ourselves baby organizers. And then I went on to become a lead organizer. So I was supporting base organizers on the ground around campaigns of getting cops out of schools, making sure that folks were able to obtain an immigration status and were safe from deportation, but also really keeping young people safe in the streets from police violence. And so I got my footing in organizing through youth organizing. So I was a youth leader and I grew up in the base, and then eventually would be part of a collective that helped mentor other young people across the city. And so today it is my honor to, again, bring us home talking about collective care. What is the role of collective care in our movements? What does it look like? What can it look like? And how does it sustain our movements, as well as talking about interdependence and interconnectedness with a little sprinkle of abolition. And so we can actually go to the next slide. Shout out to tech behind the scenes. Thank you. And so I'm not sure how many folks were able to go to the other workshops before this one, but really collective care is a practice, to me and to some of us, of coming together to take care of one another. Now, that may seem pretty simple, pretty common sense, but that is actually a really radical practice under a capitalist system that encourages isolation. It encourages individualism and working around the clock and kind of being removed from being around other people. And so organizing is an art and a science, and it is also hard work that can bring about a lot of feelings of despair, of helplessness, especially when we understand that organizing is long-term work. It is work that you can put in for decades and you may not see the fruition in your lifetime. It is work that impacts everyone, even those who feel like it doesn't involve them. And so that is why it is my belief that every aspect of movement building and organizing should be approached with a collective care lens. Next slide, please. And so Bell Hooks, if you don't know Bell Hooks, I invite you to look her up. It is actually her birthday today. She passed in 2021, but it is her birthday today, and we will bring her into the space. Bell Hooks tells us, rarely, if ever, any of us are healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. And so humans are extremely social creatures. Humans need to be around each other, especially while grieving or going through some hardships. So collective care can be and feel like a very natural process. I also want to know that 15, 20 years ago, collective care was not part of the popular narrative, nor was it mainstream. It was happening in pockets and in silos, and some folks were practicing it, but the majority of the times you would show up to an organizing space and you didn't talk about your feelings. You didn't talk about what was going on. Folks were just like, there's no space for that. We just have work to do. And so I want to just also name that we've come a long way in terms of collective care, but still have many ways to go. And so we can go to the next slide. I love collective care because it requires us to think outside the box with our approaches. There are some approaches and some examples that you will see today that are like, okay, Adi, that seems pretty like standard. And then there's some where you're going to be like, oh, I didn't think about collective care in this way. And we have the ability to shape our spaces that we're in. And so my hope is that folks leave here inspired and energized to think about the ways that collective care can show up in your life. Collective care is trial and error and making mistakes. We have to experiment and try things and see what works, especially in a world where some folks feel like we're post-pandemic. I know we're still in a pandemic, right? If we look at, especially here in the United States, the severity of folks still getting sick, folks still passing away. But there is some stuff that we have to try and see if it works. And it allows us to sharpen our skills within community building. And so in the same ways that we believe that there is a role for everyone in this work, and this work being organizing, being movement building, we also know that we have to move as if our freedom depends on each other, because it does. Our well-being depends on each other. How and when we win will depend on one another, and collective care has a huge role in that. Next slide, please. And so there is a book called Emergent Strategy. I'm not sure if folks are familiar. It is by Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a goddess in so many ways. And so in that book, Adrienne states, interdependence is a mutual dependence between things, and everything in nature works in collaboration. Some of the examples that she gives deal with nature, right? So mycelium underneath the ground, and the ways that trees and roots can connect with one another and talk. And we very much are in tune, or are supposed to be in tune with nature. So everything works in collaboration. This is very true about our movements as well. So often, many of us come into this work with broken hearts, broken spirits, bodies, and thoughts. And we are really looking for and in need of community and healing and repair. The people who come through the doors of our organizations have experienced a variety amount of violence, be it by homelessness or evictions, police brutality, living in this country without status and having the fear of deportation, gender violence, domestic violence, hunger, right? I talk about hunger being also a form of violence, whether it's our children or the adults or our elderly folk. Violence in schools, right? So violence in schools looks like so many here in the United States. You know, we have a crisis of gun violence in our schools, but also police violence in our schools, where we see young people get beat up and arrested by cops inside of their schools in front of their peers, and so much more. As we've learned in this series, and probably know firsthand, trauma can stay in the body, sometimes for many, 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 many years. Now, trauma in your body doesn't just go away because you're showing up to organize for better conditions. Trust me, it doesn't. I wish it does, and I wish it did, but it does not. So many of us are organizing without being present in our bodies. And so for me, there have been many times where it felt safer to live in dissociation or to be numb. And I was showing up that same way in movement spaces as well, right? And so we can go to the next slide. What I want us to think about as we're talking about collective care and its role in our movements is I want us to think about what kind of work is possible when we are present in our bodies, meaning you're not trying to escape from anything that's going on, an uncomfortable feeling or sensation, anxiety, grief, right? All the things that are not fun, but are a part of life and that we have to deal with. What kind of life and care can we give ourselves and each other when we are present in our bodies and also present with what is happening around us, right? There are many things happening right now. There's a genocide. There is actually multiple genocides, if we want to be realistic, as well as everything that happens here on the day-to-day. So how can we be present with what's going on, but also what's possible, right? When we are our full selves. Next slide, please. One example of something that is possible is generative conflict. And to me, generative conflict is an example of collective care. And so when I talk about generative conflict, I mean conflict that doesn't result in us disposing one another or feeding into cancel culture, which is something that we've seen happens a lot. And so the idea and the hope and also the practice, because I've seen it happen, if we are present and grounded in our bodies and not responding or reacting from a space of trauma or overwhelm or despair, we can access clearer and informed points of information in our bodies that are aligned with our values and intentional practice. So even if you find yourself activated or triggered or upset, you're able to take a moment and regulate and say, okay, I'm going to respond in a way that Adi right now feels good with, right? Not Adi that may be activated and bringing up something from decades ago, but Adi right now wants to move in this aligned way with her values. This takes practice, right? It takes, we call it doing the hard work, doing the warrior work, to be able to heal and to be able to really lean, because this is what it's asking us. It's asking us to lean into interconnectedness, even when things feel hard. And there are other practices that we're going to explore in a moment that fall under both self-care and collective care. And so in the beginning, a few years ago, I was really big on self-care. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna like do my nails and go and have cute dinners and take a bubble bath. And then you realize that's nice and it feels good to do. But self-care has so much more to do than just that, right? There's boundary work, there is therapy, all kinds of things that I'm involved in. And then I realized, this is nice, but it's just me still. And there is missing this component of being around people. Again, coming back to humans being social creatures. And I was like, this would feel even better if we did it with more people, if it was collectively. And so there are ways to do things on your own, and even, I think, better ways to do it collectively. So we can go to the next slide. One of those examples is something that's called somatics and body work. So thinking about the soma, the body. When you work with a somatic coach, you are able to identify where in your body your trauma is stored. And through some activities and stretches and massage, there are ways to release that energy. And so I hold grief, for example, in my chest, in my throat, my hips, my shoulders, right? Sometimes I find myself with my shoulders up by my ears, and it is a shape that I've taken for many years. So I don't even realize it sometimes, right? Somatic practice allows me to say, okay, I feel tight in the chest because my grief is here. What are some exercises and some examples to open the chest up, right? The body is very, very wise, and the body is often talking to us. sometimes we just don't know how to listen, or we don't know that we can listen, right? And so I've done somatic work in a group setting, which is really beautiful, as well as acupuncture, right? So acupuncture is another example of a way that healing and caring can happen collectively. I've had the privilege of attending conferences where acupuncturists administer, sometimes they use needles, sometimes they use these little seeds, in a way together to a group, and we'll do some deep breathing and grounding together, as well as sound baths. So if you're not familiar with a sound bath, those materials that you see there, we're able to use the sound and sound waves to kind of promote relaxation, promote better sleep, right? It helps with anxiety as well. And it's also something that I've done in a group setting. I want to say there is something special about being in a group setting, right? You're vulnerable. You're like, oh my goodness, I don't know these people. Are they looking at me? And you open your eyes and you see other people leaning into this practice. It is a way to build trust while doing it as well. What I've learned is that collective care can create a solid foundation in our organizing, a solid foundation in our work. And the problem that sometimes arises is there aren't that many, right, somatic practitioners. So my hope and my goal is to, one, lean more into somatics as a practitioner, but also share the word with folks, because I didn't know about somatics until somebody in movement work was like, I know you've been having really bad anxiety. Let's go see this person, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about how collective care can create that solid foundation in our organizing. Next slide, please. What I want to say first is that in order to be present with one another and present with what is, in order to both receive and give care and healing, there needs to be a level of safety, and a level of safety and care that transcends just a singular moment. And I say this because so many of us grow up sometimes without agency, or the ability to know that we have agency in our bodies, agency in our decisions, agency in the kind of organizations we want to be a part of, right? Agency in the kind of campaigns that we want to be a part of. And so when we talk about safety, we're talking about the ability to, again, be present with what is, but also be curious, right? You need a level of safety to try new things, to be vulnerable, to navigate through some exposures, right? And so the safety and care transcending a singular moment brings me to some organizing lessons that I want to walk us through briefly. Next slide, please. And so there were, and there still continues to be, a lot of learning and unlearning that I've had to do around care and healing in community spaces, in particularly, for me in particular, actually, with young people or youth leaders. And so as an organizer, there are a lot of roles that we play. So as an organizer, we are a source of information, a source of relationship building. We are guiding folks into their process of leadership development. We are guiding folks into and through their process of, developing their political consciousness, right? When you start figuring out that not only did Columbus not discover America, but there is a slew of violence that comes through that, right? When you're just figuring out all the things and unlearning everything that you're taught, especially in the United States from a lens of white supremacy and capitalism. There's a lot of learning and unlearning we're doing all the time, including with healing. And so the young people that I organized with, they were ages 14 to 25, briefly. Not briefly, 14 to 25, approximately. They were Black and brown young people, right? Self-identified. Some were in foster care. Some had been incarcerated themselves. Some had parents that were incarcerated. Some young people we worked with had recently arrived in the country, right? And so I immigrated to the United States when I was 2 years old, which is so different than someone who's 13 or 15 immigrating to this country. Some folks were struggling in school. So struggling in school looks like many things, including not having the resources to help a young person if they have an IEP, which is like sometimes it's a learning development kind of thing, sometimes it's a behavioral thing. But we often didn't have folks who even had teachers who spoke their same language. You know, I used to go and do classroom presentations in classrooms where some young people were translating for each other because they didn't have folks. And some of the young people were gang involved or gang affiliated. And the reason I start off by talking a little bit about the young people and some of the demographics is because these are the folks that you are building with. And if you are not mindful, if you are not aware of the kind of lives that the young people are living before and after they leave your organization, you're never going to really reach the level of safety and care necessary to be able to explore collective care together. And so it's really beautiful now that some of these young people, they're grown, they're in their 20s, some of them are in their 30s, they have babies, they're married, they have careers, you know, and we're still in touch. But that was only possible because I was able to show up and be present with them in ways that mattered, in ways that they were able to then see, okay, I could also be present with what is. Next slide, please. And so an approach that I took with the youth leaders, it was similar to an approach that was taken with me when I was a young person, was organizing in a way where we are organizing the whole person. And so that looks like a few things. It means knowing what's going on in their lives and in their lives of their families, in their friends, their communities. Now, this is very important to do with boundaries, because we know vicarious trauma exists, it's a real thing, and we know that the impact can be heavy. And so young people were in our offices 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes even more, if they were looking for a safe space to come to after school. Maybe they didn't want to go home because things were going on. And so before I would ask a young person to do anything related to organizing or to campaign work, or maybe I needed help around the office, I would first check in and see how they were doing that day. I would ask them if they ate, and if they hadn't eaten yet, we would go get some food. We would order some food. Every Tuesday, we had a meeting where we had hot food available regardless. So if it was a Tuesday, they knew they can come here and get a hot meal. We provided Metro cards for them to be able to take public transportation to and from the meeting space. And we had childcare available. So some of them had children, right? Some of them were the older siblings that were in charge of taking care of the younger siblings. And I will say, sometimes from what I would hear from them, that was the only time someone checked in with them that day, right? Be it in school, be it at home. It was the only time of the day that someone took a moment to say, hey, I see you. How are you doing today? Do you have any access needs? Have your needs been met? This allowed them to bring their whole selves into the program. It also allowed for some of their immediate needs to be met. And that is important in this kind of work where so many things take a toll and energy honestly can be spent elsewhere, right? So in June, in the summertime, in July, it's hard to get young people in sometimes, right? They want to be in a park, they want to be in the beach. And so if you're asking folks to show up and to dedicate their time and their energy, you want to make sure that they're okay and that they're doing okay and that you are on top of that. And so if a young person was in the office until late, we would collectively walk folks home or be involved in their schoolwork, to the point that sometimes the school would reach out to us if we had a relationship. So they would reach out to us, they would reach out to the parent. If the parent wasn't able to, you know, leave work right away, or maybe they couldn't get there, we would go and we would show up until the parent was able to get to school. We had young people who were being evicted or who were kicked out of their homes, and we helped them get eviction defense or space in a shelter. You know, there were interventions that we had to make if folks were in toxic relationships. We helped the young people get access to STI testing, right? So sexually transmitted infections. We would make sure that they had access to testing, access to medicine if needed. And so throughout all this, right, because the list is long, throughout all of this, we would take a collective care approach. We would check in, we would accompany them when possible, and hold space for them to decompress or cry or plan out the next steps in their futures, right? Because this meant we were organizing with folks from the wholeness, the whole human, and not just pieces that we felt would be important for certain times, right? One of my favorite things that we were able to do, and we couldn't do this often, but when we did, it was take the youth leaders out of the busy city for a weekend or a week-long retreat in nature spaces. And so many of them had never left the city before, or their block, or their radius of a few blocks, right? Because here in New York City, I always make this joke, so I'm from Brooklyn, that as a young person, I didn't have to leave Brooklyn, right? My school was in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn. My friends were in Brooklyn. I didn't have to, Brooklyn has 4 million people in it, you know? So I was like, I don't have to leave Brooklyn. And so we were like, okay, you're going to leave the city, you're going to leave the boroughs, and we're going to go and connect with nature. We're going to allow your nervous systems to just slow down for a second. We would do group mediation and meditation as well. We had art builds, so folks were able to, you know, paint and draw or write poems, you know, create banners together. We had talent shows, and we would cook and eat food together, which is a really big thing for us. For many of them, and even for myself, right? I want to say that too, that the nature was also good for me. But for many of them, the ability to slow down and be in green spaces really allowed them the ability to experience a different pace of life with folks around their own age. And it allowed them to dream of a different life that they didn't think was possible. So we would have talent show nights, we'd have a campfire, we'd have s'mores, right? For some of them, it was the first and only times they were able to, you know, make s'mores and eat s'mores with each other. And then we come back home and have the very real stressors of things like applying to college or taking state standardized testing, right? And so if you don't pass these tests, you can go on to the next grade, which is really, really, really stressful. We would also have moments of collective care there, right? Where folks would vent and breathe together. We would take walks, eat together, have art projects. I want to just stress that we call it breaking bread, but eating together really, really has solidified some of the relationships that I've had with young people. You know, sometimes we'll have potlucks and folks are able to bring food from their cultures, right? And talk about, you know, my mom made this meal. This is who my mom is. This is what it was like in my mom growing up in our country, right? And really be able to just take a moment and be a person and be a person with one another. And so I just want to take a moment and, you know, I brought the youth in. I'm like, I'm feeling emotional. Really just bring them in into the space. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for them and the trust that we were able to build together, right? Because I would tell folks I'm an organizer, but I'm also a person, you know? And so it went from me always being like, how you doing? What do you need? And then they would come in and see me and they would go, Adi, how are you today? How's your heart? How's your breath? Are you breathing deeply? You know, they would, have you eaten? Do you want a cup of coffee? Like we were able to be mindful with one another. And sometimes that was also the only time someone took a moment to ask me how I was doing. And so we were able to practice collective care in even the smallest of ways, because really it's about seeing a person and taking care of a person and taking care of one another. And understand that a lot of the organizing lessons and collective care practices that I've used, that I've seen practiced, have been around for decades, right? Especially when we're talking about making sure that people's needs are met. Some of us may have experienced collective care growing up in our families, with our grandparents, our parents, our siblings, our cousins, aunts, aunties, uncles, right? And so collective care, it's a term, but it is something, again, that has been around a long time and that can feel as a very natural process. And so we're going to the next slide, please. And so this is one of the moments where I want us to think outside the box a little bit in the sense of we may not think this is collective care right away because it isn't talked about necessarily in this way. And so in 1969, so just a few decades ago, in Oakland, California, some folks understood that in order to galvanize people to fight back against police brutality that was running rampant in the streets and a government that killed and condemned Black folks, first, the needs of the community had to be met. Very similar to the way the young people would walk in, and before I would ask them for anything, I would make sure they were okay. Organizers in Oakland understood that people would not be able to show up to a meeting or to an action or a protest if their kids were struggling in school, or if they were being beaten up by police, or if their families were hungry. And so one of the collective care approaches they took was also a survival program. And so that's the way it's talked about a lot, survival program. But when we break down survival and programs, right, we can get to collective care. And that was the free breakfast program. And it launched in January of 1969 at a church in Oakland by the Black Panther Party. And so here in the United States, I'm not really familiar with the ways schools operate over there. But here in the US, there is breakfast that is available for young people before school. And it's at the school, right? You go and you eat food and then you go to your first period class. This wasn't always the norm, right? Right now in 2024, it is the norm, but it wasn't always like that. Not until the Black Panther Party said, hey, actually, we got to take care of our babies. We need to make sure that our babies are fed and are, full of nutrition to be able to then ask their parents and essentially those same babies when they get older to come join the movement. And so next slide, please. The Black Panther Party members did many different things within this collective care piece. They went to neighborhood supermarkets and received food donations, right? They met with nutritionists to say, hey, we want to be able to feed the babies. Please teach us the right ways to feed the babies in a way that feels good and in a way that actually hits on all the points that they need. And then they woke up early, right? And made food. At first, it was just a handful of children, and then it was hundreds of children. And then as it spread across the country, the Black Panther Party members were making breakfast for thousands of kids before schools. And again, it's a moment where the government wasn't feeding the babies. And the Black Panther Party knew this was one of the ways that we could collectively care for one another in the midst of all that was happening around their campaigns, around their headquarters. It was a dedication to, again, the wholeness, the whole person. So being able to organize wholly and not just in fragments. Next slide, please. Another example of collective care that I have been a part of is showing up for families who have lost loved ones to police violence. And so if you are not familiar with this person, this is Eric Garner. Eric Garner was killed July 17th, 2014, here in Staten Island by Officer Daniel Panaleo. It was a moment where Eric was put in a chokehold, an illegal chokehold, right? The chokehold here has been banned in the NYPD since 1993, but it was used in 2014. And Eric, 11 times on camera, said that he could not breathe. And the officer didn't let up. Eric died on the spot. And because it was captured on camera, it became a worldwide kind of thing, right? Where folks in other countries, other continents were having actions, were sending solidarity to Eric and his mother. So I know his mom, Ms. Gwen Carr, and Eric is one of many, many, many folks that have been killed by police that I feel like I know personally. It's in a way what I know is the ghost of Eric. And I just know him through what his family says. But there are countless others, right? So Marley Graham was killed by police. Amadou Diallo was killed by police. Sean Bell was killed by police. Akai Girly, there is a long laundry list of folks that I can say. And even now the words fail me, you may not always find the words to express your love and your sorrow alongside the families, but your presence and your actions matter and say a lot. And so this is again one of the moments where I say collective care makes us think outside the box, because you may think, Adilka, they've lost their loved ones. How can we collectively care? We can't bring this person back. We understand that. But there are different ways that you're able to. And so one of those ways is showing up for a campaign effort. For instance, a lot of these families have very active campaigns calling for the firing of the police officer or police officers who may have killed their family members, because a lot of them not only stay on the force, but get like egregious raises. So the person who killed Eric Garner, it took us 5 years of organizing to get him fired. And he was making well over $100,000 by the time he was fired. And he had gotten multiple raises, right, since killing Eric. And so when you show up to a campaign effort, it could be a press conference, it could be an action, or even so, some of the most really heavy moments I've experienced are some of the court cases, right? Some families call for not just the firing of an officer, but to try to put bring charges against the officer. And so sometimes there's a court case that happens against them. And so we've been allowed to sit in those court cases, and your presence, your energy means the world to folks, especially in those moments when they are essentially reliving, right, the killing, reliving what's happened, and having the city say, look, we were in the right to kill your person, which we know isn't the case. And so when they have to relive that, a familiar face, a hug, a cup of coffee can remind them of the power behind community. It can remind them of the power of care during some of the hardest moments of their lives. And so for me, showing up in different ways, again, right? Maybe I'm getting them food, maybe there's a hug, maybe there's I'm here for you and I'm gonna be here for you until this case is closed, right? Those are all pieces of collective care because you are holding someone in what I can't imagine, right? I hope to never be able to imagine what it is like to be in their place. And so thinking outside the box sometimes it takes some doing, right? But there is so much that can come from that. Next slide, please. And then I have also experienced movement spaces. So it could be a conference or a retreat where folks have offered many things, including access to a wellness team. And so one of the things that I've come to appreciate is because COVID, it's been a few years since 2020, some folks have no COVID protocols at all. And so the places that I've gone and been a part of, they not only collective care is for people who are there, but also people who aren't there, right? Because if I live with someone who may be immunocompromised or elderly or sick, every encounter we have can be dangerous. And so by keeping me safe in that space, it is then helping me keep my people home safe when I go back. And so there have been moments of rigorous COVID protocols, so folks needing to test before you join a group and every day while you are together, right, where masking is required. And so, there are protocols in place in case somebody does have a positive test come out. There have been spaces that I've been a part of where there are wellness teams, and these wellness team members are available to you at all times in case of distress, in case of overwhelm, in case of, maybe you forgot something or you just need a breather or somebody to talk to. They have essential oils and coloring books available. And you're maybe like, a coloring book, essential oils. One, essential oils are great, okay? They bring it in, they bring you down. But also the coloring books and fidget type toys or clay or pipe cleaners, right? All that's available. And it's saying we know people learn differently. We know that it takes different things for different folks to be here and be present in the space. let's see what can help you, right? It allows us to have a variety of things available. And again, it goes back to experimenting. Maybe you didn't know that pipe cleaners and clay help you be present, right? Maybe you didn't know that actually coloring in the middle of a hard conversation allows you to be there and be present in your body. But it is just the ability to really cater to different kinds of learning styles and experiences that people bring into the room. I've attended conferences that had AA meetings, right? So Alcoholics Anonymous, that had group acupuncture and massages and Reiki available for the wellness of participants. And it makes all the difference in the world to see collective care be available from the moment you walk into a space all the way till you leave. It makes it easier to want to be there. And it also reminds you that this work can be different. You know, when there are feelings of despair or overwhelm or helplessness, there are little things and big things that are available to you in order to really bring it back home together. We can go to the next slide. We're going back to thinking outside the box, which we love. Next slide. And so I wanted to talk briefly about abolition and abolition as collective care, because abolition is collective care. And so when I think about collective care and interdependence, abolition comes up. You know, abolition isn't just breaking things down or getting rid of things. You know, we think about abolishing police and abolishing prisons, right? I consider myself an abolitionist or a student of abolition, meaning that I live my life with certain abolitionist principles, including moving away from the reliance of the state and police to handle things. And so abolition is also imagining things and dreaming and building things back up. It is creating new worlds and making sure that we don't go back to the old ways that we essentially organized from. So how does abolition tie into collective care? Well, again, it is care. Abolition says, I see you, I value you, and your safety matters to me. Abolition says, let's move away from the reliance of the state and all the criminalizing ways that the state meaning like police, elected officials, anyone who puts into place these rules and systems to really criminalize conflict or human interactions generally, right? Today, there are many of us who are mourning and grieving here in the United States because an innocent Black man was killed yesterday in Missouri by the death penalty. Although he was innocent, although evidence pointed to it, our Supreme Court and elected officials let that man down, right? And so abolition would mean that he would have been home with his people instead of what happened. And so every day we see the opportunity and the ability to change things differently. And they really do start from home, from us, and into the ways that we interact. Next slide, please. Bringing home our political prisoners, right, who have been subjected to decades. Some folks have been in prison for up to 50 years, right? So bringing them home after they've been subjected to decades of torture, malnutrition, solitary confinement, which we know is an inhumane tactic, and lack of medical care, that is collective care. You know, there are many active campaigns that exist to bring home our folks. And so as part of collective care, what I've seen and what I've been a part of, let's say you went to jail in 1970, which a lot of them did, right? Think about the Black Panther Party members, Black Liberation Army, the Young Lords. And then you come home in 2024. So much has happened since you've been gone. And you're kind of just thrown out, right? You're kind of like, you're free, and then you need to figure out life, although you've been locked up for 50 years. And so many of us have been part of when folks come home, we have housing lined up for them. We have somewhere for them to stay because the prison doesn't take care of that, right? So we have housing lined up for them. We have clothes. We have toiletries, toilet paper, soap, toothpaste, toothbrush, right? Some kind of survival money and some mental health access. All things, again, that the state does not take care of. The people home take care of that. You know, collective care means showing up. It means I didn't forget about you. It means you get to come home and have a home, you know? So these things in collective care really can mean the difference between life and death for our folks coming back home, but also it can mean the difference between life and death for some of us who are already out. And so we're going to get into some examples now of other ways that I've seen collective care play out. The first one is community security. And so what that looks like is essentially there's a group of us, let's say there's an action. So there's an action tonight, let's say, and we say, okay, there's about 300 people who are coming out. We need a community security team or just a security team. There could be 10 to 15 to 20 of us who have been trained in community security, basically trained to keep our folks safe. So we don't rely on the NYPD to keep us safe. We don't rely on the NYPD to marshal us down the streets or to block off cars so that people can cross, right? We are the buffer protecting our folks from anything else on the outside. And the beautiful part is anyone can be part of community security. Anyone can say, I want to play my part today to make sure our group is kept safe. And so that, again, I've seen be the difference between someone being beaten up by police or someone being, you know, arrested because an agitator maybe came and was trying to like get under their skin. Community security says, we got us. We keep us safe because we know how to do that and we're able to do that. The other thing is called cop watch. Again, something that you can be trained in. Anyone can cop watch. I always suggest folks get trained first, but anyone can do cop watch. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It is recording and monitoring police activities, usually with our cell phones, usually from a distance that keeps us safe. Because, you know, cop watching here, at least in New York City, it is legal as long they say as you don't like obstruct what they're doing. So you want to keep yourself safe at all times. But cop watch, for example, coming back to Eric Garner, was the only reason we knew what happened, right? Ramsey Orta was the man who recorded the interaction. And because he recorded that interaction, we were able to see what happened to Eric. And we were able to fight like hell for Eric Garner and his family. And so you go and you cop watch with a bunch of groups or like people, and you are able to, you know, monitor. You can cop watch at actions, you can cop watch at train stations, right? So anything like that you're able to do. And what it does, again, is move away from the reliance of the state, move away from us needing to say, hey, we need the police for this, because we understand that the police don't have our best interest at heart here, especially as Black and brown folks. There's a long history of things. And so it, again, allows us to step into that agency of like, hey, we keep us safe. Then there's de-escalation, right? So you are able to de-escalate in the streets. You can de-escalate at work. You can de-escalate in school or in apartment complexes. This also can mean the difference between life and death or police interactions, or even some like inter-community violence, right? So de-escalation is simply, there's also trainings for that, but really seeing a moment of tension or a moment that's, you know, things may be getting a little hectic and being able to bring it down, right? Being able to connect with folks and saying, hey, I see you, I hear you, what do you need right now? You know, there's obviously something going on. And so de-escalation, again, is a way to keep folks safe and also see things from a different light, see things from a whole perspective instead of just like little pieces. The last one on this slide is medics at actions. And so it wasn't until after the pandemic that I was able to know and notice that we had medics in our actions. And so it really is what it sounds like. It is someone who is trained, maybe an EMT or something like that, someone who is trained in basic medic stuff. So if someone's wounded, if someone is out of breath, if someone is having some kind of attack, right, they are there and available for those people. If someone who's differently abled or elderly is like not feeling well, I've seen folks have cars at actions so that they can transport people from place to place, right? Again, making sure that people and their needs are met, making sure that we are holding each other down and thinking outside the box. And I'm going to show you all two pictures briefly, so we can go to the next slide. And that is me right there. What you're seeing here, I am playing a community security role here. We were at a defund NYPD action. And so I was the front lead. And basically what I was doing was, one, keeping the pace of the action. And so while you're doing security, you could also do that. So I would be hearing in my ear through a walkie-talkie from folks in the back of the action, because this is the front. And if folks were like, hey, we have a really big gap here, or we're leaving folks behind, part of my job was to slow down the front and say, hey, let's slow down. We want to make sure everyone else can catch up with us. But also sometimes the media gets really, really pervasive, and the media will throw themselves on top of like people trying to take pictures and stuff like that. I would be that buffer, right? So I wouldn't let the media get too close. And there's certain things you can do with your bodies, right? Because we're using our bodies to do that. Everyone that's holding those banners knew that my job and my purpose was to make sure we were all cared for. And so often I would ask folks, do you need water? Do you need us to slow down? What do you need? Right? In different ways, and ways that some people had never experienced before. And so you're able to see that replicated in different ways. Next slide. This here, also me, hello. This is an action that we had around funding excluded workers. And so the Fund Excluded Workers campaign was around making sure that essential workers that were excluded from, so there was a moment of the pandemic that folks were able to get funds from the government. Some folks couldn't, right? If you were undocumented or other different things, some folks didn't get any kind of funds, and they were essential workers. They were at risk to getting COVID because they were at work all the time. And so there was a campaign to get funds for those folks, among other things. It's a very, very, very general view of the campaign. What you're seeing here, we had drummers. And so I got into the spirit and then I was dancing because I was like, man, you know what feels good? Dancing feels good. Dancing in community, because there were other folks that were dancing, feels good. But what I want you to also notice is all of us here are masked up, right? We made a conscious decision to say, hey, part of collective care today means we're all going to have masks because we want to keep our folks safe. And so I just wanted to note here that, again, there are different ways, especially now since the pandemic, to still keep one another safe and practice collective care. Next slide, please. And so we're going to continue on with some examples. I also put a quote here by Audre Lorde. You do not have to be me in order for us to fight alongside each other. I do not have to be you to recognize that our wars are the same. And so I put this quote up there because it just reminds me more around collective care and more about some people say we don't owe things to each other. No, we owe everything to each other. We owe the love and the joy and the compassion and just being rigorous in our discipline and in our practice to not only have collective care here, but to make sure that it happens everywhere and as much as possible. Time off. Taking time off from work is collective care, not just in taking time off, supporting your people in taking time off. I'm one of those folks, I never take time off. When I am stressed, I dive into work. Well, I used to be. I'm a little better now. I'm trying to get better because I've had folks say, Adi, that's not collectively caring for you because we're watching you do this, right? And so making sure that your people take time off and then also respecting that. If you know someone is taking time off, don't hit them up about work until they're back at work, because you know what? The work is always going to be here most times. And so supporting your folks and taking time off. In order to do that, we need to fight for the right to have care, adequate care and insurance that is not tied to your jobs. Well, at least that's how it is here, right? Right now, if, universe forbid, my job is like, hey, we don't want you here no more. That takes away my health insurance. And I'm in trouble because I need my health insurance, right? So we want to fight for the right for folks to have not just adequate care and doctors that look like you and doctors that believe you when you go and talk about your ailments, but also have insurance that's just available, because as people, we should have care and we should have insurance. And so fighting for that, and coming together and supporting folks in doing that. Mutual aid. Mutual aid has been so big, especially in or since the pandemic has started. And so there are a lot of mutual aid efforts you may see on Instagram or social media, also just like in your church groups or anything like that. So there are folks that raise money or bring materials for people who may be behind on rent, folks who are sick and maybe need some funds to get their medicine, folks who have lost their homes to fire, to disasters. Some people need mutual aid just to eat. Again, hunger is violent and it is so present in the United States, and I'm sure in other places as well. Some people need mutual aid and some funds to just hold them down until they start a new job. There again, the pandemic and even after the pandemic has shown that we got us and we need to support each other, and there are different ways to do that. The last bit here is court and jail support. And so in 2014, Eric Garner was killed July 14th. We then would spend the next few months, we being a group of us from New York City, coming up because we wanted to shut the city down depending on what would happen to the police officer. And so December 3rd, there was a notice that came out that they were not going to essentially press charges on the officer. They said that he was in his right. And December 4th of that same year, we turned out 20,000 people in the city and marched. I think we marched for like 6 hours. We shut down the bridge. We were doing die-ins. Die-ins were really popular then. That's when people would lay down and block traffic or lay down. Some people did die-ins in their schools. And essentially, we would lay down and block traffic for the 11 minutes, representing the 11 times that Eric said that he couldn't breathe. And after that, we blocked the bridge and 36 people were arrested, right? And so, one, it's really emotional and scary to see your folks get arrested, but it's a tactic. We used it. We knew it was going to happen. And so some of the court and jail support is trying to figure out, one, where your folks are taken. So doing the research. And it was about like almost midnight when folks were arrested. And so court support or jail support is figuring out where they are, letting their families know, hey, your person got arrested and all that stuff. And then court support, usually you are arraigned and then folks get to go home until they have to come back to court. But that takes hours. The person that we waited for the longest, we waited 21 hours after they were arrested for folks to be let go. And so in court support, you are literally sitting in court waiting for that person to come out. And so when they come out to see the judge, it is care to look into the audience and see your people, to know you're not alone, to know that folks have your back. While we were waiting, we had folks give out Tiger Balm, right? So Tiger Balm is this kind of ointment you put on. Some folks had bruises from being handcuffed. We were able to put Tiger Balm on people. We had medicine. Some folks needed aspirin, needed Tylenol. We had snacks. We had water and oranges and fruit waiting for people who both were coming out from being in jail or in court. And those of us who were waiting, because again, we would wait, right, 20 plus hours waiting for folks to come out. And we would rotate shifts so that some of us can get sleep, some of us can charge our electronics. And when folks actually came out, we had warm clothes and warm food and water and hugs. Sometimes you just need human contact when you go through something so traumatic. And we were there all the time for all the actions and all the support to make sure that our people were able to go home safe and be safe after something so traumatic, but so important to bring attention to what was going on. Next slide, please. All right. And then here I have a quote by Assata Shakur. It says, "No movement can survive unless it is constantly growing and changing with the times. If it isn't growing, if it's stagnant and without the support of the people, no movement for liberation can exist, no matter how correct its analysis of the situation is." And I put that quote because I think that no matter how much our movements were growing and changing, if we don't have and didn't have collective care, it wasn't going to be an inclusive movement. It wasn't going to be a movement that saw and organized people from their whole selves. And so feel really good in where collective care has come. And again, we have so much to still go, but it feels good because again, the movement wasn't always like this. And it shut out a lot of people because essentially we were saying, don't bring yourself, we're not going to take care of you. And we have to take care of each other because we're all we got. And so talking about taking care of each other and we all we got, here an example also of collective care is restorative justice and transformative justice. And it is essentially a different approach that can include an accountability process because we know that harm and conflict are inevitable as people, but we also know how we deal with it can be different. And so restorative justice says, let's bring in people that support you so you have a support system. And let's think of ways that aren't punitive to really work through our conflict or our harm. And so this like generative conflict is something that takes practice. It takes doing the work, but I have seen it really shift the conditions of a campaign, of a group of people, and essentially life. Because again, it has informed the way that I and the values that I have as an organizer. Group walks and hikes, my favorite is my favorite, right? We'll walk around, we'll have group talks, we'll have hikes, get out of your house, get into your body, move your body, right? We want to be able to move the body. Making meals. So the same way that I enjoyed making meals and eating together with the young people, also doing that with other organizers and other members that were older as well. I say safety planning here. Safety planning is really important because safety planning, what it is essentially is you're coming up with a plan for someone or yourself who may be in crisis. And so we may have someone who is suicidal or someone who is in a deep depression. And there is a group of us who are aware of that, who are part of a safety plan. So the safety plan may say, if I reach a really, really critical moment of my crisis, here are the 3 people that can call. Here are the 3 people that can reach out. Here are the 3, and this is just, an example. It could be more than 3 people. Here are the 3 people who can show up for me. Here are the 3 people that I feel safe with showing up, right? I often tell people from my mom to my homies, I'm like, if I am in crisis, do not call the police. Call my people in my safety plan. Call my mom. Call my siblings. These are people who know and understand me and can provide that collective care to not only get me out of a moment of crisis, but also support me to get better, right? And so that's part of safety planning. And then meal trains and care packages. We spoke a little bit about care packages with political prisoners who are coming home, but care packages can be for anyone. It can be for someone who is going away for school. It can be for someone who is going through a divorce, someone who's sick, someone who just moved, right? Someone who just started a new job and is struggling a little, right? A care package says, I thought of you. These things remind me of you. And I want my care to be shown this way for you. Same with meal trains. Meal trains are, they're like some websites where someone can say, hey, I just had a baby, which happens a lot. Meal trains happen a lot that I've seen if folks have babies or if folks are sick or out of work for some time. But again, it could be tailored to anything. A meal train allows a group of people to essentially buy meals or send meals to someone who maybe isn't doing well, or maybe, providing that meal takes one more thing off their plate and allows them to be cared for in this way. A meal train says, I want to feed you. I want to make sure your belly's full. And I want to make sure that you don't have to worry about this because I got you. And so, again, these are some examples that can be tailored, right? Or there are other ways that we could also show up for one another if we look out and think outside the box and think about people in their entirety. Next slide, please. And so what becomes possible because of collective care? These are some things that I thought about and that other folks have also thought about. So collective care means that we can have healthy organizers, right? It's cliche, but in organizing especially, you really can't pour from a half empty cup. So if an organizer is healthy, they're able to then have healthy organizations, right? And so a healthy organization could look like many things and it could look differently. But as long as people are seen and heard and valued and their needs are met, usually there is a bit of a healthy ecosystem, which then brings me to longevity, right? So I started organizing when I was 14. I am 35 now, so I've been organizing about 21 years. I want to keep organizing for the next 20, 40 years, right? This is my thing. This is where I want to be. So what needs to be in place for me to be taking care of myself, or having folks take care of me collectively to ensure that I can be here in organizing for the next 20, 40, how many ever years, right? Collective care opens up the possibility of building trusting relationships because, again, it says, you know, let's be vulnerable. There's safety here. We're able to do this together. And then supportive communities, because we have us, we keep us safe, and we in the community know more than we may think we know what we need to be okay. Collective care means that there'll be less implosions and collapse of movements. So a lot of organizations close, a lot of coalitions disintegrate, a lot of movements kind of just shut down, right? Because folks are not taking care of one another. Folks are burnt out, folks are feeling exploited, folks are feeling all things. And so if collective care is there, it becomes possible to have more fruition. Um, and lastly, it makes it possible for us to win. If there's collective care, we would be able to win. And winning looks however it may look like for you, your campaign, your people. But if we have healthy organizers who are around for the long haul and who are building trusting relationships and supportive communities, we can win, and we can bring that freedom and that liberation that essentially brought us into the movement for the first place, right? Looking for that. So we'd be able to do all those things if collective care was central to organizing and central to movement building. Next slide, please. And so that leaves me with this last question for you all, right? I just want us to think about, and you all to think about, what kind of work, what kind of life is possible for you and your communities and your families when we center and practice collective care. It can be personal, it can be professionally, it could be, right, in your groups and in your ecosystems. But what becomes possible when that is centered versus isolation or overworking or thinking that we have to just figure it all out individually? Because we don't. We are allowed to do this and to hold one another. And that is the end of my presentation. um, just, yeah, want to thank y'all so much for sticking it out with me. And we'll, yeah, pass it over to maybe Gabriella at the moment to figure out next things.
Yeah, so thank you so much. That was so beautiful, and I got so many messages from people saying how much they needed to hear this. And I know I really needed to hear this. I'm gonna put you back on spotlight. So thank you so much for the time that you put into preparing this and for sharing so many different pieces of experiences that you've had and moments that you've shared with people, and also bringing those people into the space like you did. Um, and one of the things that I was, so we're gonna, sorry, we're gonna open up, if people can put questions in the chat, then we will invite people to unmute themselves and ask their questions, and we've got some room and some time for discussion while people think about what they might want to talk about. I get facilitators dibs. And yeah, one of the things I was thinking a lot about at one point when you were talking is when you were giving examples, for instance, about like community security, cop watch, medics, childcare. One of the things that I've experienced in actions is those things not only provide so much to people, right? Like they are looking after folks and they are making the space more accessible or safer for people. But as you pointed out, it's also it's also an opportunity for people to step into the work and to care for others. And I know when you and I were talking a little bit before the session, we were thinking back on different actions we've been at and how it's often like also the grease that like makes coalition work succeed, like people who have different things that they can contribute can step in and offer that to the action or to the community. Um, yeah, speaking for myself, like I did a lot of legal observing, right? Like that was like an entry point into some kinds of actions where that would not have been a space I would have known what I could contribute to. But then you got a bunch of, dorky law school students showing up and helping in that way. And with childcare, for instance, like we had some actions where childcare was an opportunity for nannies and domestic workers that we were organizing with to contribute not only just like and participate, but actually like be the experts who we rely on to look after people's children and also be the people who are really sharing their talents for the space. And the last thing I just was thinking as you were talking is um, these practices, like you said, they make the work more successful. They give us longevity. They help us look after each other. And I also feel like there's so many moments where I look around and those are the moments that I actually feel like the ball is always going to be shifting, right? But those moments when like people are serving each other food or looking after each other's kids, you feel like this is what we're doing it for. Like this is the beloved community that we're fighting for, and we glimpse it in these moments, we practice it and we bring it into being. And we don't always have to look towards a future that we hope for better things. We actually show up for each other and we enact it. And I love that you gave so many powerful examples of that. And yeah, just thank you for bringing me back into all those
Like,
spaces.
oh, thank you. I'm like, yes, Gabriella, get up here, facilitate with me. Yeah, no, my favorite. So the organization that me and Gabriella used to work at, there was like a kitchen and all these things, and you walk in, and we call them the doñas of the block. Doña is just an older woman, and the doñas would be making food for everyone and serving food, and then their own grandbabies are running through the office, and you really feel exactly what you're saying. Like this is the work. This is why I do this work. And yeah, it's here already. I love that framing because often it's so easy to be like, oh, we're never gonna get to where we're trying to go. And it's like there are pieces here now. And the work is just to make sure it can continue happening, right? So thank you for that. Absolutely.
All right, we're gonna start inviting folks to ask their questions. Ian, I think we can start with you. I'm gonna invite you to unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hello.
Hey,
Okay,
we hear you.
great. Yeah. So, I mean, I've definitely experienced exhaustion from activism, even in environments where there are a lot of activists who are. So it's not like one of these groups where everything is falling to like three people. But even in this situation, me and also other people took kind of long breaks to recover energy, and then we're able to do it well again. So like filling the cup, not trying to pour from a half empty cup, as you said. And do you think enough? I feel like there's maybe a bit of a tension that between this collective care concept and that maybe there's not, or do you think? And basically, do you think if there's enough collective care well done, then it more or less could obviate the need for such activism breaks? I mean, assuming that the people have whether more or otherwise more or less stable lives. Yeah, what do you think of that? If you know what I mean.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is a
Thanks a
great.
lot for the talk in general, by the way. It was brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's a brilliant question. I think, well, one, thank you for highlighting that activism is exhausting because it is, right? It's like we don't want to sugarcoat or just have this cookie cutter version. It's hard work. Organizing and activism is hard work. It's important work. And so to me, I look at it as a kind of twofold kind of thing. One, I think if folks are feeling, even with collective care, because collective care can be this one piece in a puzzle of many pieces. And so if done accurately and enough and sustained, then I do think that there would be a less need for folks to take breaks. And at the same time, I do think that taking breaks is part of collective care. Also, if you are noting that you are exhausted and not feeling well, maybe your immune system isn't great or you're not sleeping and so you're sick a lot, it is important to take that time off because this work is the kind of work that's going to be here, whether you take time off and come back. And we want to make sure that folks are getting the rest that they need. The organizer in me is like, we'd be able to take less breaks once we are able to transform the conditions and transform the systems that may have us in these conditions that we're organizing in the first place. And so that's probably what will help us with less breaks, but definitely think that taking breaks and what you do in those breaks, right? So taking breaks and actually taking time for yourself to reset yourself, whatever that may look like for you. I think it's important to do that. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to invite Elsa to unmute themselves and ask their question.
Yeah, hi. So my question is how to break the culture of endless meetings that happen often or long or frequent, and speculation regarding what kind of organizational structure is the best. I've seen it to leading to useless burnouts and fatigue for so many people. And just doing everything through meetings is quite an exclusive practice and shuts many people out, those who have different capacities and so on. And I think this is particularly present in some communities that are emerging and figuring out what forms of organizing are the best. So they don't have a long tradition of doing things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elsa, for this question. I also was part of a group where all we did was meet. We had meetings and we had meetings for hours and hours and hours. I would have so many meetings that my work day was just meetings. I didn't have time to even like do the work or come up with programs or campaigns or anything like that because it was literally meeting after meeting after meeting. And, I think and I would offer, well, one, there is this thing that I believe in, that there is collective wisdom in the space. And so if any of these questions, you're like, oh, I have an answer, I have something I want to add, please use the chat because we want to make sure that folks are everyone here is a teacher in their own way. So if you also have had this experience or have things you want to share, please use the chat. I invite you. But what helped me at the moment was having a really candid and honest conversation. And this is the moment where things like collective care and sometimes we just gotta just be honest with our group. We call it like courageous honesty or radical truth. I felt safe to say it first because of the relationships I had built with folks. And I made sure that my needs were met before I engaged in this conversation. And so that looks like I made sure that I had hydrated a lot that day. I made sure I had eaten that day so I wasn't angry or like, all over the place. And I posed a question to us around why we met so much. And was there a way for us to change the structure so that we're meeting less and also prioritizing what's going on in the meetings? There were things that we would be in 3-hour meetings for that we could have just done in an hour or done differently. I think the culture of how we organize, it's a lot, right? It's a lot and it looks differently, but I would suggest talking to folks and trying to change that structure and giving examples, right? I would suggest folks tap into your like thinking or dreaming brain and say, okay, if I don't want to be in all these meetings because it is exhausting and because it does bring up all these other things that need to happen, can we do this differently? Can there be working groups? Can some of the stuff be emailed? If we're meeting so much, can we change how we meet? Can we meet outside? Can we meet somewhere else? Are there meetings that can happen online or things like that? But I would really try to, yeah, change up the structure, because I think folks think we need as many meetings as we have. And the reality is that there are different ways to do this, especially if exhaustion is felt throughout the entire collective, because usually if one of us feels it, it means many of us feel it. And so folks sometimes just feel nervous to bring things up, but I would, yeah, pose like, do we need to meet this much? Where else can we be putting all this energy to move forward and to move some of this work that doesn't include just sitting in a meeting all day? Because then when you're in meetings all day, you're also just not able to meet with the community, right? Or like meet with other folks or like do other kinds of work. So trying to divvy that up there. But I'd be curious to see, oh, and then see Martina, thank you. You may want to look into group facilitation. It helps in making sure that meetings are effective. Yeah. So definitely want to keep inviting folks. Yeah, sorry, now I'm reading. I'm like, definitely want to into doing that. And I love the work meetings or like one-on-ones for emotional social meetings. Yeah. Maybe we'll meet and go get lunch, let's go do something. Let's just break out of this idea that meetings have to look a certain way. And also, yeah, don't be afraid to say, we meet too much. We need to change this, because the 6 hours we spent in this meeting, we could have been in the community knocking on doors or talking to people or bringing other folks in. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
We have a question from Dami. I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself.
Hi. I hope maybe you can hear me well. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I'm coming from like cultural / art / activism and community organizing context, and now I'm taking a break because I needed it after like 4 or 5 years of working full time, and now I'm pregnant. So from the last 4 or 5 years of my intense work, I experienced it again and again, that we are lacking resources, and it's not just because it's not just a problem of like a few organizations, but pretty much of the system that especially racialized and intersectionally marginalized folks lack resources. So system is formed in that way. But at the same time, there are a lot of needs. Like the place that I worked at, we had like the center community space, and people needed this space, and we had to offer this space and organize together. And these needs are very urgent. For example, also especially in the context of current genocides, and all the oppression which is going on. So there are these needs from the communities that we have to attend to, while the resources are still lacking. And at the same time, we are somehow still in this capitalistic system. So we have the deadlines to attend to too, like all the grant proposals and so on. So it was such a struggle to find time. I mean, it's not something that we have to squeeze in, right? Like this collective care, it has to be the fundament, but like it was in the end always like ending up like we had to squeeze it in somewhere. So yeah, I just it's not really a question, but I just wanted to hear from you about your experience.
Yeah, thank you so much
and thank you so much for today.
Thank you, and congratulations on your a bundle of joy. Thank you for being here. And I'm glad you also took a break. I took a break kind of one time. I mean, I went to school, but I was like, oh, I have my documentation. I could apply for financial aid and go to school. So it was a break, but not really a break, because I was still in school. Like, this is wrong. I'm organizing here too. But this tension that you bring up, it's a tension that we deal with here. I don't know if I have like brilliant answers, but I definitely have experience where I remember when Donald Trump first got elected here. Oh my goodness. I'm like, I mean, anyway, I wasn't gonna get into it now, but I'm like, there's a lot going on now. When Donald Trump first was elected here, everyone was panicking, very rightfully so. There was a lot of fear, especially in undocumented communities, around what would happen. And what we started doing, we being just a collective as a whole, we were in the streets every day, mobilizing. And where that was effective for a little bit, what it did was burn us out. What it did was, remove us from being able to actually pause and strategize and say, okay, things are hard right now, but things have always been hard. They just look a little differently. And so what it did was bring us back to the drawing board. And I use that example because there's always going to be an urgent need in our communities. That's also something that I've learned as someone who grew up in poverty, as someone who, organized with people who were in poverty, who didn't have warm water, who didn't have food to eat, all those kind of things. And so one of the ways that I've seen really folks step up because there is a lack of resources, mutual aid is one of the ways that I've seen. So there's crowdfunding. So folks, if 100 of us give $5, it's better than if some of us give 20, But even that, some folks don't have the $5, right? And that's totally okay. But what they may have is maybe they can come work a shift to take care of someone's babies. So we were able to get creative around, okay, let's find allies who do have money, because there are allies who have money, right? And so if those allies have money, let's get the money and distribute that. But then let's also get creative around the ways that we can show up for one another. So maybe there was a potluck one day or a food pantry one day, we were able to find resources that did exist. And then in the holes that were missing, we were able to plug in different ways. But mutual aid is usually one of the ways that I have seen that happen a lot, where it's, especially now with social media, you're able to kind of circulate all that stuff around. And there have been mutual aid efforts where people from across like a whole country are putting that money in. But that's the hard part, right? That's how capitalism tries to win, by having us so tired that we can't do more, right? So the deadlines, like sometimes I'm like, how am I supposed to work my 40-hour a week job and also show up for community and then show up with my family and right? It's also sometimes a bit of like trying to organize and reorganize and prioritize. But yeah, I'm like, mostly because of the capitalism part. I'm like, yeah, we always tired. This is meme that I saw. I'm really big on memes. It's dark humor, but it was like, the world could be ending and I would still probably have to go to work. And it feels that way, right? Because we're all still being called to go to work in the middle of just saying like the genocides and all these things that are happening. But I think it's a bit of like leaning into community, figuring out and being honest with one another. Like, this is what I'm able to give. This is what I'm not able to give. And then, sometimes there is some shame that comes up when we're like, I need to take some time for myself, because a lot of us are taught that we shouldn't. But I'm always an advocate for the work will be here. Take time for yourself. If you get sick or run down or are exhausted, you're no good to us and we're no good to you, because we're letting each other down. And so we want to make sure that folks have that support. And yeah, trying to like organize your time differently. But it goes back to like, let's transform these conditions. Let's do the thing, right? Let's actually dismantle these programs or systems or institutions that have us here in the first place, and let's actually organize to build a different world, a world of ease, and a world because we're all worthy of that, whether or not we're taught that. And so yeah, I would say it would start definitely for sure with community work. But thank you again. If you have more answers, put them in the chat, because I know that there's a lot of brilliance here. Yeah.
I'm going to invite Sergio to unmute themselves and ask their question.
Hi, thanks. This was a really nice talk. And I want to ask a question, like maybe a little bit.
I don't.
Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Lost a second.
So what you have people you're supporting who have like really high needs for care, like people, for example, like neurodivergent people with autism or bipolar or depression, and what you do when your group notices like we can't really fully take care of this person, like how do we draw a border there? Because it's really fucking difficult to draw a border there when we want to do this type of work and we want to balance it with the other type of work that we are doing. So yeah, what do you do when you feel your group's capacities is like on the limit and you're like, I'm curious of this.
That question lands deeply for me. Thank you. Thank you for your question. It is so hard. I think a few things that come up to mind. One is boundaries and boundary work, which is hard for me. Boundaries, I suck. I'm getting better, but my therapist, shout out to her, she's helping me do boundaries. And I say that because an example I have is we would have a Facebook group with the young people on Messenger. And that messenger was only for meeting announcements and things like that. And sometimes the youth would get excited and send, videos and things at 2 a.m. and like wake us up. And so we had to have a boundary where it's like after 11 p.m., no more sending. If it's an emergency, call me, those kind of things. It's a very kind of easy boundary to put down, but boundaries are important because we need to know ourselves good enough to say, hey, I need help. I am unable to actually support this person for ABC reason. And this is the thing about mental health, right? I have anxiety and major depressive disorder, and I have CPTSD. And I have a therapist, I have a psychiatrist, I take medicine. And I say this because these are things that the people who support me need to know. And so folks have supported me in, finding a doctor and finding the help. So that's one way that some folks can support. I would sign up because mental health access here in the United States is really difficult. It's like doctors are not that great. It's expensive and you don't, there's often waiting lists. And so sometimes somebody in crisis may not be able to navigate finding a doctor, finding help. And if I'm in a good enough place, I might help them navigate that. I might make calls and help them like show up for that. But the big thing too is the more of us that belong to a collective, the more resources, the more experiences, the more abilities we have, right? And so if you have a group of just 10 people, maybe focus on bringing that group bigger, right? Bringing more folks into the work that have more resources and that have more experiences. But I think the big thing again is like being able to say, hey, actually, I can help here. Because sometimes we want to be, do good and like help folks. And it may make things worse. I may be like, oh, I can like talk to this person. It's fine. And I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I may make this worse. Maybe now they're activated. Now they're like, I don't trust this group. I don't want to be here. Right. And then it's like this whole spiral. So knowing when to say, hey, I can't do this. Being able, if you can't do that, there are definitely other things you can do, right? So maybe you can't, I've had people come to me in the middle of a young person having like an anxiety attack. And for me, because I have anxiety, I know like breathing exercises and I know all these things. So somebody was like, I actually can help. Adi, can you step in? And I'm like, yeah. But before I step in as Adi, I need to ask myself, am I in a space where I can do this? And if not, let's find someone else. In moments, there have been moments where we've had to call an ambulance and stuff like that, which brings this whole things here. But then I'm like, okay, if I'm calling the ambulance, I'm going to get in the ambulance with you. I'm going to go with you to the hospital. Like, I may not have the skills necessary to help you as a doctor, but I can be there as a support for you. But yeah, I think it's like knowing your capacity and knowing that it's okay also to not know. And it's okay to not have that skill. Maybe we can figure out how to all do somatic work together. But right now, this person needs our help. Let's do that. And then for me also, it's a lot of like knowing when to involve family. I try not to, again, like call police for anything. But sometimes you have to call 911 to get certain help, right? That's the numbers out here. And so yeah, but definitely, and it's like when you have a campaign, sometimes if there's only 5 people that know your campaign well, those 5 folks are going to burn out pretty quick. How do we then bring 15 people who can talk about this thing or who can go to meetings and do that? So expanding your crew, because then your collective care gets bigger and it just doesn't fall on you. But then you'll find other folks who may be going through the same things and have other tips that we can learn from. Yeah, but sending love, because I know the boundary and the borderline is hard. It's hard. I want to help everyone. I want to love everyone. And sometimes you just can't. But it's like, yeah. And then figuring out, maybe there's a safety plan we can have for someone. So maybe you may not be able to bring someone down from like an episode, but maybe you're a part of their safety plan. Maybe you're someone they can call if they need help. Maybe you're someone they can call to say, you know, are you available for a walk today? Right? Because it's those little things that make a bigger kind of impact as well. And yeah, for sure. Because I was gonna get into something. I was like, I don't think that makes sense. But yeah, I appreciate that question, because there's a lot of us, you know, that struggle and go through things and need help. And sometimes all it takes is someone just being like, I got 10 minutes to listen to you. Talk to me. What's going on, you know? But again, I was gonna say, it's gonna sound contradicting. I was gonna say you are your first priority, just in the sense that you want to make sure you're okay before you jump into something. And then you could be collectively like together. Yeah. Thank you for that.
We have worked through all the questions that are currently in the chat. If there's somebody that has something brewing, maybe you might have time for it still if you go ahead. But otherwise, I was going to suggest if people also want to put any messages in the chat, either to share resources with each other, which has already been happening and is amazing, or also to give Adi some love and appreciation for this amazing talk, which has also been happening. But yeah, I think, as I said before, I know that people have really been longing for an opportunity to learn more about this. And I think, you know, in some ways, this is us trying to also care for people doing this work by connecting them with someone who can share so many jewels of how this gets implemented, what the struggles are, you know, and also not sugarcoating it. Like, it's really hard work. It's exhausting. Even when things go really well, people lose steam and need to take breaks, and coalitions succeed and then fall apart and then get reconstituted or don't. I don't think that anyone here is pretending that that this is like something that can be mastered and then it's like smooth sailing, but thinking about like the best ways to look after ourselves and each other while we're doing that sailing is really important. So yeah, the chat is open for a few more minutes, and Adi, yeah, I'm just really, really grateful that you could join us. And I think also there's so many different perspectives and kind of traditions of how to do this kind of organizing that develop in some spaces and then they develop differently elsewhere, and to have a chance to hear from what you've been working on, you know, in the Youth Power Project and in other spaces you've been in, and bring that all the way over here. And, you know, giving people a real visual glimpse into like walking with people to go pick up coffee, or like, you know, having childcare available for older siblings who are responsible for their younger siblings. These are all just like really concrete examples that, like you said, also help us like broaden our imagination of things that are very easy to do. Some things are more challenging. Some aspects of care require more resources or more expertise. But there are so many different ways that just require a little bit of imagination. And sometimes giving these examples is enough to really like spark that imagination and get people going. I'm also partially just rambling so that the chat can stay open. We want people to show an outpouring of love. So
There is something in the chat Well, first, back to the question around like neurodivergence and folks and stuff like that. Something that I've done too, um, in places where there are wellness teams available, I'll check in with a wellness person. And so they become like my wellness buddy. And throughout the week, they're like checking in. Are you okay? Are you doing this? So having those moments. And again, it goes back to safety, like me feeling safe enough to say, hey, I've been struggling. These are the ways you can support me, has been helpful as well. And then, yeah, care is has to do with gender. I see this here. Let's talk about care as gendered labor. It is. And so what I like to do, I don't shy away from conversation. I usually, if there's a group and there's a mixed group of like cis women and cis men and trans folk and non-binary folk, I talk a lot about how care usually is given and who it falls on. And so we'll have a conversation, and then we will encourage usually cis men to take a lot of roles. And so what's been beautiful about that is one, allowing them to step into a role and expand the ways that care has been shown to them and what's possible. And then also like allowing other folks to step back and be able to take other roles that they usually may not be able to, because care tends to be usually leaning toward a certain gender. So I encourage you all, have the conversations. Hopefully they're not too hard, but have the conversations and develop a structure, right? Sometimes we'll have like a chart if we're together and it's like, these are the tasks that need to be done. Who can sign up and do the tasks? And so when I see, I'll pay attention to it. And if I'm like, all right, there's too many women or like non-binary folk on this thing, can we actually get some more, right? Like making sure that that is being spoken about, because again, we're trying to break down the ways that the world has worked and build up a new world that works for all of us and that really has like equality and allows folks to, yeah, just step in and be able to learn different things and play a different role. So thank you for that. That's important.
Okay. Yeah, I want to echo also what my colleague Gabby wrote in the chat. We really appreciate everybody jumping in to not only join for this session, but really contributing to the session. The questions were fantastic. It was, I think, also really nice to share this like little corner of the internet with you all and to hear that there's so many people who want to show up for each other and want to center this approach in their organizing. We are going to conclude the session and we're going to conclude the series. If you registered for this session, we're going to send a follow-up email soon with links for recordings for this and also the prior sessions that we had. So these are also hopefully resources of value to you and other folks that you organize with. And if anybody also wants to share any more resources on collective care, we'll leave the chat open. And maybe, Gabby, we can put the music back on and leave the chat open for a few minutes so folks can put whatever they have on hand in the chat. But otherwise, if there's something you come across later, you can send it to us and we can try and circulate it. I'm pleased, I really dig your company. Thank you, Adi. This was amazing.
Thank you, everyone.